Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis podcast. I am John Dehlin, one of your co-hosts, and I am very pleased to be joined with
Margi Dehlin. Nice to see you all.
And
Natasha Helfer Parker. So happy to be here.
Hi, Natasha.
Hello.
So glad you're with us today.
I am very happy to be here. It's cold and sunny here in Wichita.
Yeah, we should probably tell people it's December 11, 2018, just for history's sake. People can know when we recorded this stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so this is episode 2. For those who didn't join us, we did an episode 1 last week. And what was the topic? Hello, everyone. Anyone remember?
Natasha, do you remember?
The topic was all the things that we found useful or of value in
Gratitude.
Mormonism.
Gratitude for a Mormon faith crisis. That was last week.
Yes, which is a nice, positive way to start.
Yes, and now we're on episode 2, and I'm really happy to be here with you guys. I'll just really quickly, we'll talk about our mission. Margi, why don't you tell the audience what our mission is, just so they understand.
Sure. So our mission involves the 3 Ps: positive, practical, and personal tips for navigating a Mormon faith crisis.
I love it. And one thing I want to add, and I want to make sure you guys are okay with this, I want this podcast not to be just for people in a faith crisis, a Mormon faith crisis, but also for people who want to understand others who are going through a faith crisis. Natasha, do you object or do you sustain?
No, I sustain. And also, I think just nuancing the word faith crisis, because I think a lot of times people think that that's just leaving the faith. I think I'm still a member and happy to be a member, and but definitely have considered myself in transition, right, to kind of a different type of Mormonism than maybe I would have practiced, 5-10 years ago. So transition can mean a lot of different things. And so we're here to kind of address that wide spectrum that, just whether it's nuancing, progressing, understanding yourself differently, or leaving, those are all different forms of transitions.
I love it.
Very important.
All right, so that's kind of what our mission is, and our message for everyone who wants to hear is that a faith crisis can be a huge gift. That's why we're calling this the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis, and that's why we have a logo that has sunshine and a seed sprouting up from the soil. We want to give people hope while still acknowledging that this can be super hard. This is a weekly podcast. Expect it once a week. And one of the main reasons we do this is because we want to help people through what they do. And part of that is each of us having a coaching practice and planning events that can go into more depth, because the podcast is only meant to sort of be an introduction to what's going on. But people often need more than that. So let's each talk about what we do in our professional life. Natasha, why don't you start this time?
Yeah, so I offer therapy and coaching services, both in office and online. And you can reach me at natashaparker.org. So that will kind of let you know everything that I'm doing. And I do have an upcoming workshop in the Salt Lake City area during my Christmas break, which will be December 28th. And this is specifically for mixed faith couples. So marriages where one person is transitioning and one is not, and helping people with all the many challenges that they're facing kind of in those relationships. So I hope that you'll consider joining us if that's a situation you're in.
I love it. It's great to have you, Natasha. And Natasha is one of the most experienced and best marriage and family therapists, sex therapists, and counselors for faith crises that I know. And that's why I'm honored to partner with you.
Thank you, John. Likewise.
Margi? Absolutely. Margi, why don't you tell us about you?
Sure. So I am a certified life coach. So I see most of my clients are around life transition topics and how that impacts our lives. So things like identity, grief, relationships. Those are some of the things that I deal with. I also do participate in select events with John and often Natasha. So I do that as well. And then I write some on my blog beautyinthenow.org. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
And I'm so thrilled to have you as our co-host.
Thanks, babe.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And then my name is Dr. John Dehlin. I have a PhD in clinical and counseling psychology. My clinical and research interests have always been on the nexus of religion and mental health. And so I've been helping people for between 1 and 2 decades, depending on how you count, navigate a faith crisis. And this is my passion, what I've dedicated my life to. And so I'm thrilled to be here. So, all right. Well, that's the introductions.
Well, let's not forget too, since we're mentioning what we're offering, February 15th through 17th is a intensive couples retreat. All 3 of us have done many retreats together that are weekend retreats that, hold like 40 to 60 people. And we've gotten many requests from those types of retreats to have, more in-depth and also kind of smaller group opportunities. So that's a really great opportunity for, again, couples who are transitioning together. So this would be specifically for those who are maybe facing a transition where they're both nuancing or leaving the faith. And we'll also probably be doing a mixed faith one in the fall.
Yeah. And for anyone who wants to see more detail about Natasha's event, the Mixed Faith Workshop in Sandy, Utah, or the Mixed Faith Transitions retreat in Salt Lake City that Margi, Natasha, and I will all be involved in, you can go to mormonfaithcrisis.com/events, and we'll have information there. I should also add that we are planning to organize and host several workshops and retreats in the 2019 calendar. Look for us to be announcing those in the next few weeks. But we know there's interest in Colorado. We know there's interest in Nevada. We know there's interest in Arizona. We know there's interest in Northern California and Southern California. There's a lot of interest in Europe, in Western Europe, Chicago. Where?
Seattle has mentioned things to me.
Yeah. So all you got to do is email us. If you want to bring a workshop or retreat to where you are, you need to email us at mormonfaithcrisis@gmail.com. And we will get back with you and organize these events, because these events are always rated 4.9 out of 5. They're highly valuable. People say they've changed their lives. They've transformed their experiences. And we just know they're super helpful. So if you want to be at one of these events or help us plan or bring one of these events to your area, please email us at mormonfaithcrisis@gmail.com, and we'll get it going.
And don't forget that I'm in the Midwest, so it's not that difficult for me to even do a one-day event like in Nebraska, Oklahoma City, St. Louis. I'm willing to drive down to Texas. So just, it's not that complicated to at least get one of us to come and host an event, especially if you have people that that would be willing to come.
And I should have mentioned Ogden and, Davis County have expressed interest. South Jordan has expressed an interest, Utah County, Provo. So that same here. We're always willing to organize events in Salt Lake City, of course, in Utah, and bring Natasha whenever there's enough demand to justify that expense. We always would rather do an event with Natasha than without. That's how we always have worked and feel. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So that's some of the info out of the way. I want to give a shout out to our first donor. Right now, we're launching this podcast without any donations, really. We are doing this primarily because we just want to help people and believe in it. In addition, we are hoping that this could become sustainable at some point, where at least we can get enough donations to cover our time. And we want to just shout out to Courtney Hill Edwards from Portland, Oregon, who is our first donor. She went up to mormonfaithcrisis.com, clicked on the donate button, picked the level of donation that worked for her. And we just can't thank Courtney enough for her support. So thanks, Courtney.
Yeah, thank you.
And also we want to just ask our listeners, as you listen to these episodes and value them, please consider supporting us just by signing up. $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever you can afford makes a huge difference to keep this sustainable. At some point, we'll have to decide whether there's enough interest that we want to continue it. But we're committed to this for at least a few months. before we kind of make that decision. But part of that is going to depend on you guys donating. So please consider supporting this. And also, I just want to say, not just for you, there's a lot of people that go through a faith crisis and kind of feel good, but who want to make this resource available to others. So think of it not just as how it might benefit you, but if you want to invest in a resource such that those who are going through a faith crisis can have something, a podcast covering 50 to 100 topics at their disposal, so they don't have to suffer the difficulty or pain or conflict that you did. Think of your contributions working in that way as well. Go ahead, add anything?
I don't think so.
Natasha?
Wow, that's great. We so appreciate it. We love doing this work, and we can only do it if it's sustainable. So that'd be great.
We already mentioned this, but I'll just say it again. I do coaching at johndehlin.com. Margi does it at beautyinthenow.org, and Natasha does her coaching at natashaparker.org. And please feel free to reach out to any of us if you want personal coaching or support. All right. So the final thing that we have as business is just that we want to make sure people understand this is interactive. The reason why we live stream this, the reason why we're on social media, is because we really want this to be interactive. In other words, we want you to help us pick the topics that we cover. We want you to give us questions. We want you to give us stories, tips, tricks, problems. We want to have this be communicative. So if you're joining us on the live stream, we hope that you will put comments and questions in the live stream, and we'll try to respond to them real time. If you want us to cover a specific topic, email us at mormonfaithcrisis@gmail.com and say, hey, here's my question. Can you guys cover this in an episode coming up soon? And we'll actually take your questions and address them. And then also, if you just want to share stories or tips or tricks, I would love to have a feature each week where we share tips or tricks offered by our listeners. So we just want to encourage interactivity. And we'll keep your emails anonymous. If you just want us to use your fake name, if you want to use just your first name, give us a fake name. We would love to have this be interactive. And also, you could always go up to the podcast afterwards on mormonfaithcrisis.com, find the episode, and share comments in the blog post. So those are all the different ways that this can be
more personal.
Mm-hmm. And then also, please share, if you can't donate but you do want to support this, please give us a positive review on our Mormon Faith Crisis Facebook page. Sometimes we have meanies who go up and just say mean things when they haven't even listened to the episode. And the only way to counteract that are for positive people to leave positive
meanies
reviews. No, if you don't like the episode, that's fine. Give us a critical review. But sometimes people go up there just to be mean and to try and damage what we're trying to do for whatever reason. So we need lots of positive reviews. It helps let people know this is valuable. Please share this with others. The more that you share this with social media, share it with friends, share it with family, the more it gets the word out. And that's a way to help us if you're not in a position to be able to support us financially.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So I think it's time to dive in. And the first segment that we always like to cover is the segment on what's working. And so right now, we're each going to share something that we're doing in our lives that's kind of working out for us. And Margi, how would you feel about going first?
Okay. So do you know what's working for me, John and Natasha? What's working?
And our audience.
And our audience is with the time change, I feel like, and how it gets dark so much earlier in the evening. I feel like I get tired earlier in the evening, and I've decided to go with that a little bit. So lately I've been heading to bed closer to, I would say we're heading to bed more like 10:30 range, which is good because we get up at around 6 in the morning. But that's been really working for me lately. Just getting to bed, as opposed to, it feels really early and very dark when we wake up in the morning. So kind of going with that natural instinct. We have don't we have a little bit of a bedtime routine now, babe? Where we kind of,
We do.
We hit a bath, You get to take a little bath.
I
Then we-
bathe in Margi's bathwater. So Margi bathes first, and then I bathe in her bathwater.
As it should be. And then we watch
TMI.
and then Mrs. Maisel.
We watch the show. Right now we're watching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon.
Yeah, and by then we're kind of tired.
And we cuddle, and I do your back, and then we go to bed.
Yeah, it's working. It's working for me.
Shout out to Lacey, who's joined us, Jennifer, who's joined us, David, Billy, Kara, all of you. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here. Natasha, what's working for you this week?
All right, what I chose to focus on this week is aromatherapy. So I have my little show and tell candle, and it's all about forests and Christmas type scents. Very nostalgic for me, but just in general, I just like to have scents around me. Not everybody's like that. Some people are super sensitive to scents, and it actually can be nauseating or difficult. But for me, I really enjoy having either like a fresh scent in the spring, kind of a cozy cinnamon or earthy scent in the fall and winter, and things like that. So it just helps me feel cozy and calm.
Great. Self-care is a critical part, and self-nurturing is a critical part of navigating a faith crisis.
Yeah, and I am with you, Natasha. So with you. With senses and that kind of smell.
Yeah, there can be like little satchels you put in your clothing. There can be like, some people like incense. Incense is a little strong for me sometimes, depending on the type, but
yeah,
never float your boat.
Yeah, they do. Also essential oil diffusers.
Yeah, essential oils. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, I just noticed Courtney joined us. So Courtney, we just gave you a big shout out. So go back and listen because we love you. Hi, Courtney. Okay, what's working for me? Okay, this is going to be a little bit controversial in some crowds.
Really?
Oh, no.
I'm going to say what I'm giving up. And something I'm giving up is something that, people are going to kind of be shocked about. People feel really strongly about food and beverages. And so I'm just going to say that for my whole life, I never drank coffee, tea, or alcohol. But once I stopped attending church, once I was no longer a member of the church, in my case, I occasionally would drink coffee, and I got to where I loved coffee. And I got to where I wanted coffee every single day, and that was working for me. But I noticed that what accompanied my coffee drinking was a cough. I would just have it irritated my throat. And believe me, I went on and off. I tried different creamers. I tried different temperatures. I tried every possible thing I could try.
Because he loves it.
Soy, almond, regular milk, decaf, cold, hot. I tried it all. And no matter what I could do, coffee made me cough and hack and wheeze. And so I'm going through the very difficult phase of giving up something that I added after my faith crisis, which is coffee.
That you enjoyed. And it was
I still crave it every day, and
it
I
was
want
a
it.
ritual for you. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am trying to replace it. Sometimes I have a chai latte, which works for me. But I don't drink coffee, at least not for now.
And why is this controversial?
Well, I once said I'm giving up coffee on Facebook, and it was like the whole Mormon internet unraveled. It's like people were offended and angry, or they were just like, don't give it up, John, you can't give it up. There's 20 things you need to do because you can't give up coffee. And believe me, I didn't want to give it up. So I tried everything everybody told me.
You did.
And I'm just saying coffee isn't working for me. And
you know what I think this is about, why it's controversial? This is where I'm going to pick on all of our Mormonism. Like, this is where I think, like, regardless of where you are in your belief, we're all still very Mormon, is that we tend to, like, think about things like if we say something, it has to apply to everybody. And I think we need to all get a lot better about the for me, like, for John, coffee isn't working out. Great. Okay, but he's not imposing that. He's not saying in that statement that everybody should stop drinking coffee, right? And I think that we come from that culture where, remember back, when somebody would stand up in testimony meeting and say, yes, for, on Sunday, we don't ever, take off our Sunday attire. And now all of a sudden it felt like this pressure that everybody was supposed to not take off their Sunday attire, right? And so I think we need to practice at just letting us all be wherever we're at with all these things.
Totally. And I get this a lot when I go to parties with a lot of progressive or post-Mormons, and sometimes there's alcoholic beverages. People really want me to drink for some reason. And I have just decided for personally right now, I'm not going to drink alcohol. And sometimes it feels like that makes people uncomfortable. And they want to ask me why, and they want to try and tell me why I should consider it. And everyone always means well, but I think it's okay as going through a faith crisis or even leaving a religion, if you end up doing that, to just say some of these things I'm going to keep. I'm going to keep these good things. And so I love it. I love
Well, it's
that.
differentiation skills. It's like,
Yeah.
if you don't want to drink alcohol, I can deal with that's not a projection on me. That doesn't mean anything about me and whether or not I'm going to drink alcohol, right? Or
I
coffee.
love hanging around people who drink alcohol. When people are using marijuana responsibly, I've got no problem with that. I have fun with them. It's great. It's just a personal choice for now, right? Maybe I'll change. Jana's joined us. Jana's always been a really great supporter.
Jana.
So shout out to Jana.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us, Jana. If you guys want to share some things that are working for you, we'll integrate them into the episode. So listeners, feel free to make comments and share with us what's working. Okay, well, today the main topic is, what are the common causes of a faith crisis? And again, those of you who are going through a faith crisis will know what your causes are. But we still want to normalize what we've found to be many of the main causes. In addition, for those who are either brand new to a faith crisis or who are trying to understand or empathize with others who are going through a faith crisis, we want to cover the territory in this episode. So this is sort of an introduction to the many reasons why people have a Mormon faith crisis. Is that all right?
Yep.
You ready to roll, Natasha?
Ready to roll.
Okay. And listeners, if you want to share in the comments what caused you to have a faith crisis, we would love to incorporate that. We're willing to use only your first names or pseudonyms if you want, but we'd love to incorporate your comments and experiences into this episode. All right. So I wanted to begin with some qualifiers. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one thing that's important for everyone to understand, and this is going to sound a little bit controversial, is that leaving Mormonism or leaving Orthodox Mormonism is actually the norm. And I don't, there are qualifiers to that, but I guess it's important to understand from a normalization standpoint that 2/3 of the people in the world who are baptized Mormon are not active in Mormonism. And half of those don't identify as Mormon at all. And the people that we're talking about there, especially in the third world, developing world, you have these super high baptism rates where missions are baptizing sometimes 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 a month. A lot of those, Latin American countries, Filipino countries, even African countries have activity rates of like 10%. And so, there's a huge chunk of people baptized all over the world that are included in the church's 16 million number who just don't identify as Mormon anymore. And the church has lost track of them. So you could sort of say 1/3 of all people ever baptized Mormon, 1/3 of that 16 million, the church doesn't know where they are and they don't identify as Mormon. Now that's not some condemnation of Mormonism or the church. That's just the statistics, right? You could sort of say roughly another 1/3 are people who are baptized Mormon, but they're inactive. They're on the church's rolls. The church has their addresses. The missionaries kind of know where they are, but for one reason or another, they just don't choose to attend, or they don't identify as Mormon anymore. It's also probably important to note there that the church, this is just an aside, the church in their statistical record keeps, if they've lost somebody, they keep them on the rolls until they would have been 120 years old. And that's not with any pernicious motive. That's just, they want to make sure they're not scrubbing people from the rolls until they're sure that they don't live anymore. And I think they just decided on 120 because most people are dead by 120. Pretty much everybody's dead by 120. And so, so I guess I'm saying there's a decent percentage of people in that 16 million who are dead but the church just doesn't know they've died and they've stayed on the record. So anyway, the point is only about a third of that 16 million are people who are active. And when I say active, the church defines an active member as someone who attends church once a month as a minimum. And so again, even when we're talking about active church members, there's a pretty low bar for that. So there's about 5 to 6 million active Mormons in the world. And that's somewhere between 30 and 40% of that 16 million.
Well, and I would say a low bar for Mormonism, because in Catholicism and in a lot of these other churches, going to church once a month is actually seen as fairly robustly active.
Yeah. And Natasha, I've heard you talk about some training you received that segments different types of religions as more or less what, fundamentalist or orthodox, is that right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Mormonism tends to be on the more orthodox side, along with Orthodox Judaism, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventists,
Right. So our markers are going to be stricter.
Yeah, than say a Lutheran or Presbyterian or
right.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, and then finally, I want to make sure we understand that we're going to be focusing our discussion today primarily in sort of a US-centric, North America-centric, Western European-centric perspective. I cannot say I've spent much time, if any, with Latin Americans and truly Latin Americans in faith crisis, people living in Brazil or Peru or Argentina, people living in China or East Asia. We certainly have a small percentage of them as listeners on Mormon Stories podcast and in our practices, but 99% of the people I've worked with as a coach or my listeners on Mormon Stories are people from either the United States, Canada, kind of North America, or Western Europe. So I'm just acknowledging that's going to shape how we talk about things today. Natasha, do you want to add anything to these qualifiers that I've already shared?
No, I would say that's true. I mean, I'm a Spanish speaker, so every now and then I do get Latin American people coming. And my husband, served his mission in Brazil, and he's kept in touch with several people, which is interesting that some of those have faith transitioned as well. So we don't necessarily see, in my lived experience, which is minimal, I don't necessarily see the reasons Latin Americans in particular are transitioning as being that different from European and United States Americans. But I agree with you that I don't know that we have enough data to really speak with it with confidence.
Excellent. I didn't realize you did coaching in Spanish. That's super cool. I know Spanish, but I can't. That's beyond my competence.
Yeah, I do both coaching and therapy in Spanish. Yeah.
That's so cool. Very cool. All right. Okay. So with those qualifiers out of the way, I think the next thing I wanted to start with is a discussion about the harmful stereotypes about why people have a faith crisis. And it's important to start with this because it's so triggering. If you are in a faith crisis, you're going to immediately connect with this and relate to it. And if you're not in a faith crisis, but you're trying to understand people who are, these are stereotypes you generally want to always avoid. And so let's go through them one by one. Natasha, do you want to hit the first one? What's
yeah, so a very classic one is that somebody has been offended. Somebody, something happened where there were hurt feelings. My kids call this butt hurt. It's probably not very polite, but so and so something has happened, and you're offended, easily offended, and therefore you stop coming to church, or you allow your testimony to be affected by these hurt feelings. And it implies this idea that you're not big enough or mature enough, or you're not able to take the higher road, because if you were able to do those things, then these little minor offenses wouldn't have such an impact on your testimony. That's kind of how it comes across. And we even have stories that are usually shared in Sunday school, like the classic milk story that's
Thomas Marsh, where
false, but
somebody got the disproportionately small amount of the milk strippings from a cow.
Right.
So which, number one,
isn't even a true story.
Historically true. That Thomas Marsh story about the milk strippings is actually historically inaccurate. There were other things, significant, credible things that led to Thomas Marsh and I guess his wife leaving the church.
Right.
But it's also just, a trope.
Yeah, so it's a way to kind of poo-poo or minimalize. And my main two issues with this one is I've been offended a lot. I don't know how you can't be in a church family and not be offended and still attended for, many, many years. And secondly, the other thing that I think is harmful about this is being offended and having hurt feelings and putting boundaries up when an offense is actually legitimate and valid is an important thing for mental health and relational health. So by kind of touting this idea, it's not very helpful for people to kind of feel this pressure to ignore pain or significant offense. Like I shouldn't even pay attention to that and I should just push through and go to church no matter what. That's not necessarily a very healthy mental health, I guess, standard of care.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you said, it's just sort of like used to minimize, diminish credible reasons for leaving, and to minimize the importance of us taking care of each other, frankly, and to imply that we're weak or feeble and that we didn't, that we were just fragile. I love that. Thank you, Natasha.
Well, and I'll just add too, like a lot of times in the process of a faith transition, there are things that are very offensive that are done to people, whether it's discipline or taking away of callings or discrediting them in the ward or to their own family members. And so it becomes very difficult to have a sustainable relationship in some ward communities.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we'll talk about the more severe cases of that in one of the upcoming bullets.
Yeah.
Okay. Margi, do you want to tackle the second one?
Sure. So another harmful stereotype would be that you are weak or you never really had a testimony to begin with. And something that just kind of comes up for me with that is it strikes at that unworthy, you're not good enough, you didn't do the work, you didn't try hard enough, that something is lacking in you to begin with that made this kind of come to you. And that's something that I feel like is deeply problematic, especially for, people that I see and have experienced who are transitioning. If there's anything, it's like the opposite is true. How hard they work, how committed they are. And so that's another really harmful stereotype.
It's very victim blaming. It doesn't allow the institution to take any responsibility. And where's the measurement tool? Can I put my finger up on the weakness tool and see where these are all very subjective concepts that are just used. How do you measure how strong a testimony is, how weak or strong people are? So it sets it up as a false, difficult, problematic process to begin with.
And it always brings it back to the person.
Right. It's a victim blaming.
Yep.
Yeah, process. Yep.
And I'm just going to reiterate something you said, Natasha. When we did the survey for Marlin Jensen and church headquarters on why people leave Mormonism, we found, at least in the United States, for people who left over historical reasons primarily, or social justice issues, we found they were higher than average educated, higher than average socioeconomic status, higher than average levels of service, of church calling. So these were APs on the mission. These were Relief Society presidents at the BYUs. These were Relief Society presidents in adulthood. These were elders quorum presidents, bishops, bishopric members, stake presidency members, stake high councilmen, stake women's leaders, even area authorities and the like. And so if anything, that's a stereotype is a problem, because at least when it comes to the Western world in sort of educated, moderate to high socioeconomic status Mormonism, it's the best, it's in Marlin Jensen's words, often the best and the brightest who have a faith crisis, not the weak and the feeble people. Okay, I'll take the third. Is that all right? And this is one that I don't personally resonate with much, because and this ties into my coffee thing. my behavior hasn't changed a lot as someone who went through a faith crisis. But the third harmful stereotype about people and why they leave the church is that they wanted to sin. So it's sort of like you really had to have that beer and you left the church because you wanted beer, or you looked at porn. Oh my gosh. Well, of course he left the church. He looked at porn, right? Or, there was this sort of decades ago, this immediate assumption that if someone left the church, they must have committed adultery with somebody. They must have cheated on their spouse. Or, any other things, drug use or tea or whatever it is, immediately associating a desire to sin with leaving the church. And this is really tricky. And I'm just going to say my take on why I don't like it and why it's not often accurate. The first is kind of what we said before. Most of the people that I deal with in my practice, coaching practice around faith crisis, did not leave the church after some sort of sin. They, again, were in the elders quorum presidency. They were in the bishopric. They were in a stake high council. And it was more, they were serving in seminary or serving in some calling and stumbled on something and wanted to learn more. Or they cared so much, they had a child come out as LGBT, or, they experienced some trauma or abuse. That was what it was. It was not just, needed a beer or looked at porn. Another problem with this idea, the stereotype, is the idea that Mormons don't sin. So, like, we know, for example, that masturbation is considered a sin. We know that Mormon men masturbate as high as 90% or greater, and that women have significant, rates as well. That pornography is rampant within Mormon culture. We know that there are active Mormons who drink coffee or drink tea or who disobey the Sabbath by Mormon standards or whatever it is. Mormons, and divorce rates are just as high within Mormonism as outside. And so this stereotype that people left because they sin just ignores the fact that Mormons are sinners too.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that, Natasha? Did we lose Natasha? Do you want to add anything to that, Margi?
You didn't lose me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I muted myself because my dog was barking.
No, that's no
I'm sorry. I would just say that I think sometimes when people are going through a difficult time, such as a faith transition, sometimes they might have behavior that is, whatever you want to call it, problematic, like maybe have an affair or be, abusing alcohol or, things like that. And so whether that's like, to your point, it's not just that Mormons don't sin and transition or sin. I think people just in general in transition sometimes can get into habits or into problematic behavior just because they're trying to cope with something that's very difficult. And so people outside might be looking at that going, oh, well, see, that's because of the faith transition. It's not so much because of that. It's because it could be any difficult thing. And that's why we see problematic behavior regardless of your status within Mormonism.
Huge. That's huge. Yeah.
I also want to add that there, were you going to say something? I also want to add that there are people who, after they've experienced a faith crisis, they bring back their sense of moral authority and they do an inventory on their own morality. And I did this with coffee, they just make a conscious decision. Okay, coffee used to be viewed as a sin, but now I've done the research, I've looked up science, I've investigated, and I've decided that coffee is actually going to be healthy for me because maybe I have, indigestion problems or constipation or whatever it is, or maybe it gives me a boost, or maybe I've read scientific journals that say people who drink coffee live longer, whatever it is. They decide I'm going to have a beer every once in a while or a glass of wine with dinner, or whatever the sin may be, or on Sunday they may decide I'm going to go skiing. It's easy for a believing Mormon to point at a change in behavior as the reason for their faith crisis, when oftentimes somebody has the faith crisis and then thoughtfully and deliberately makes a behavior change.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which is not problematic in their view. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like an inevitability on some level in switching from external to internal, is that you're actually exploring a bit on your own to kind of figure some of these things out.
Right.
Yeah.
And then this, this is also a sensitive matter, and I'm just thinking of lots of things as I go, but there are people who have a faith crisis and then commit adultery, right? But we have to be careful about that for two reasons. One, again, is because there are faithful Mormons who commit adultery and are unfaithful. But also, there could be the situation where somebody's in a devout, faithful marriage. One of them loses their faith. They either try to talk to their believing partner about it, and then they can't, or they're not able to effectively communicate, or they're so scared that they keep it to themselves. And so then maybe they make friends on the internet and find other people that they feel more safe confiding in. And so because they don't have a healthy foundation in their relationship, and then because their relationship experiences some significant change or trauma, that can lead to, infidelities within a relationship. But that might be more a symptom of an unhealthy or an immature relationship and bad choices, than it would be to blame it on the faith crisis itself, as if, people who have faith crisis cheat. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
It's a sensitive topic. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, just that there's a tendency with all of these stereotypes to be greatly oversimplified, right? And quite it creates distance. So it comes back to that kind of control dynamic where it creates distance from those who leave and those who stay. It makes them kind of scary or dangerous, and that protects inevitably the church on some level.
And you jump to it, but Kara makes a really great comment. Shout out to Kara Adams. She's our friend in St. George. I saw her at the excommunication of Bill Reel. She's been on Mormon Stories once. She's a social worker in St. George, if I'm remembering right. But she says, I believe these stereotypes help make believing members feel safe, telling themselves that it won't happen to them or their loved ones if they have a strong enough testimony. So much of the blaming is based on fear. And we still have one more point to cover, but Margi, you jump to it, and we're going to just thank Kara for that comment. Oftentimes, these stereotypes are either projections of the believing people or self-defense mechanisms to help them either protect themselves or the people who have left, so that they can not have their own faith be threatened. Is that insulting, Natasha, to say that?
No, and I do think we do this with a lot of different things. Like the way I would maybe say it is that it's not, faith transition. You can't blame faith transition for things. You have to really look underlyingly. I say this a lot about, for instance, pornography. It's not pornography's fault that you have that you're watching it for 3 hours a night or something, right? Because a lot of people don't watch it for 3 hours a night,
Most people don't.
Yeah, is that depression's fault? Is that social anxiety's fault? Is that a relational issue's fault, right? And so all of these things, whether it's problematic behavior or a reworking of behavior that's no longer seen as problematic, it's easy. Like I like the language Margi used of oversimplifying, which it's much more complex than that. You really have to dig deeper. Like what's at the heart? Because just blaming it on that is an easy out that's not really accurate anyway, and it's going to leave you dissatisfied in the end. It might make you feel comfortable in the beginning to be able to blame it on something. We are creatures that like explanations, right? We like to be able to say, oh, I understand why this is happening. So it's a very natural human tendency, right? To just simplify the narrative, know what's causing something, and therefore feel safe in that construct. But it's going to disappoint you because that's not really what the real problem is.
Yeah.
And sometimes, just to be fair to believing Mormons, they're so scared about their worldview falling apart, they don't want to know. And it's not because they don't love somebody or don't care or hate others or mean. It's just they're either comfortable and they don't want to move, or they're terrified about the implications of really digging deep. And that's why when most members lose their faith and leave the church, the most common response is what I call the cricket effect. which is no response at all. That's a symptom of people just being scared, not wanting to go there and talk about it because they don't
I
want to
think
have
that
that
response is highly subconscious. Like when
yeah,
I was in more believing days and
Mhm.
people wanted to share a bunch of like what I would consider anti-Mormon literature or anti-Mormon kind of ideas, I wouldn't have said, oh, I'm scared to lose my testimony. I was very confident in my testimony. I would have just said, I don't want negativity in my life. I don't necessarily
Mhm.
want to spend time or energy on something that makes me uncomfortable and sad, And
Yeah.
so I think that even though you're right, that I think fear does play a role, it's somewhat subconscious. And I don't think that believers are scared people, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. All right. So the last harmful stereotype is that. Do you want to do this one, Natasha?
Yeah, so it's that they were exposed to anti-Mormon literature or anti-Mormons, right? So we have this idea that there's this information out there that's meant to, downgrade people's testimonies, and if you access that type of information, that then it will, completely desecrate your beliefs, or that you at least will be influenced by those beliefs. And this is I it's an interesting dichotomy, because having lived in the Midwest for so long and having seen some of the types of literature that are out there, there's definitely things that are spun in a way that are really weird and creepy. Like even me now as a more transitioned Mormon that is very aware of my history, I would read some of those documents and go, oh my goodness, like they're totally
You're talking
using,
about like evangelical
yeah, like that
anti-Mormon
exists.
literature.
Right. Like it exists. But a lot of, I think, what has been misunderstood in the history of Mormonism prior to the internet, which is really only about 15 or 20 years old, as far as most of us accessing it, is that actual history has been seen as anti-Mormon because our way of kind of, we kind of have the Santa Claus version instead of the, St. Nicholas version of our history presented to us on a regular Sundays basis. And so this is a very complex cultural construct in our Mormon history, where a lot of people consider anti-Mormon literature things that really now are available on the Mormon essays, right? But that's a fairly new development in our history as a Mormon people. So, but there is stuff out there that I would consider just kind of
Right.
spun in a way that really is trying to, make people leave or things
Right.
of that nature.
And I'll just add my 2 cents on this because
Yeah.
this is probably one of the ones I feel most strongly about. For those of you who are trying to understand your believing, or your doubting or disbelieving family and friends, you should know that the term anti-Mormon is generally viewed as offensive by people who are questioning or leaving the church. And it's for these reasons that Natasha started to talk about. There is factual, credible history about Mormonism that the Mormon church fully acknowledges that is deeply problematic. We'll be getting into those in just a minute. That's different from just lies that are intended to take people out of the faith and that are meant to mislead and deceive people. But historically within Mormonism, we had the tendency as a social and a psychological defense to label it all anti-Mormonism. So if somebody, it could be as innocuous as someone asking an innocent question in a Sunday school class, they might get labeled, that's an anti-Mormon question. Or somebody reads a book by, I don't know, Richard Bushman, a stake president and a patriarch. Don't read that, that's anti-Mormon literature, even though it's written by a very faithful, devout member. And of course, if someone's left the church and they are just expressing sadness or pain at what they experienced, instead of looking at them as someone who's been hurt and who's been struggling, many people who have left the church have been labeled as anti-Mormons, just because they wanted to express sadness or discomfort or disagreement, even polite disagreement. And so the vast majority of people who have left the church over historical or doctrinal reasons or social justice reasons do it because of factual history that the Mormon church now acknowledges. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, like Natasha, you said, they wanted to whitewash or hide or obscure the problems. But in the modern internet age, they realized they can't do that anymore. And so they've acknowledged so many of these problems that we're going to talk about in just a second. But
well, and our history is difficult on this because people who wrote about these historical issues once upon a time got excommunicated. And now these same issues are being posted on LDS.org, written by the current LDS historians. So we have a complicated history with the word anti-Mormon. And I think oftentimes it's used as a way to monitor conformity. And so we want to be, and to your point, John, that's why people are going to be very offended by that word, because most of us who are transitioning, or especially in this kind of world where they were once very devout and are transitioning to a less devout stance, most people care very deeply about Mormonism. It's not that they're anti-Mormon. They're wanting to be honest. They're wanting to have conversations. They're wanting to talk to their families. They're wanting to have relationship around some of these issues. So to label it anti-Mormon is devastating for so many people.
Yeah, if we were to look at all of these, again, it's just this tendency to other, to minimalize, to marginalize, to invalidate. And it's natural. It's nobody's bad here. These are all natural, healthy reactions on the part of believers. But it's something just to be aware of for us to feel validated, and for Orthodox members to just become informed about, so that they can communicate effectively with their loved ones who are struggling. A quick shout out to Amy Germer, who we love and who's awesome, and who says that her shelf broke after an interview with her stake president. Certainly that wasn't anti-Mormon literature. Thank you, Amy, for sharing something personal. We want to encourage all our listeners to feel free to share their perspectives as we go, because that makes for a more rich podcast. Victoria writes, these stereotypes can also harm the people who are experiencing a faith crisis. When I first went less active and was struggling, I was scared. I thought because I wasn't taking the sacrament that God wasn't with me anymore, and that something bad might happen to me. I was left feeling scared and confused. It was only when I found out many things about the church history and current issues and lost my testimony, I then could see what was happening to me and why I felt that way. That is really fascinating, Victoria, that these stereotypes can harm believing faithful members.
It's absolutely true.
Wow. Thank you, Victoria. Lisa writes, they are wanting to find their true self. And that's Lisa's speaking to the fact that for many, it's a journey of authenticity, that their faith crisis, like we tried to touch on in our first episode, you like to talk about this, Natasha, it's a healthy, normal developmental process to deconstruct your faith at some point and then rebuild a worldview.
Right.
That doesn't need to be pathologized, right? It could just be
shamed, or
it could be celebrated.
And many people do that within their faith religious tradition. I don't think that any 50-year-old would say Mormonism was the same understanding as when they were 19. They've grown and developed within their own construct.
Chantel writes, she loves it when Margi makes an appearance.
Oh.
Well, Chantel, we have good news for you. Margi is a regular co-host on this podcast. So she'll be making lots of appearances. She's a regular. And then Sherry writes, I was told I had a problem with authority when I disagreed with church history. Yeah, thank you, Sherry, for sharing that. That's also very common is people are going to just grasp for straws to try and control or, limit your behavior, your thoughts, your feelings, the information. That's a normal reaction for a very Orthodox religion that just wants to protect itself and stay safe. It's not that everybody's mean or trying to hurt anyone. It's just people trying to protect either their beliefs or the organization. And so it's common for people to be invalidated in all sorts of ways. So Sherry, thank you so much for sharing.
And the common thread here with all of these is that it does put the onus of responsibility on the person who's having an issue.
Yeah.
Again, none of these, there's never like, well, maybe there's really an issue we should look at, or maybe there is a problem with our history, or, oh, maybe we should look at our policies, or, oh, that's a good thought. I never thought about it that way. These are all putting the onus of responsibility for the issues within our church history and our church social justice issues on the person bringing up the complaint or the concern. And so anytime you have, so that's a systemic problem, because anytime you have like an interaction where only one person is going to be held responsible, or one entity is going to be held responsible, then it's off balance to begin with.
Absolutely.
I love it. We have some comments coming in about people sharing what caused their faith crisis. We are going to get to those. We're going to slot them into the category that comes up. So Jana and M, hold on. We're going to be covering yours very soon. And we want to encourage listeners to share what caused their faith crisis, and we'll slot them into the category that we discuss. Is that all right?